In this episode, we are going to build a clear, beginner-friendly understanding of where security decision authority comes from and how to confirm the boundaries of that authority before action is taken. Many new learners assume that security decisions are made by whoever has the most expertise or whoever sounds the most confident, but organizations do not run safely on confidence alone. Authorization is a formal idea, meaning it is the legitimate permission to decide, approve, or direct actions within a defined scope. In security management, that scope can be enterprise-wide, limited to a business unit, limited to a system, limited to a dataset, or limited to a specific process like procurement or incident response. When authorization boundaries are unclear, security programs develop two dangerous habits. Either people act without permission and create political or legal fallout, or people hesitate endlessly because they are afraid to step outside their lane. Both habits increase risk because they produce inconsistent decisions, delayed responses, and a loss of trust between teams. By learning to validate sources and boundaries of authorization, you create decision legitimacy, which is one of the quiet foundations of a mature security program. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A practical starting point is to recognize that authorization has sources, and those sources are not all the same. Some authorization comes from governance structures, such as executive committees, boards, or formally delegated leadership roles that are responsible for risk decisions. Some authorization comes from policy, where an approved policy assigns specific responsibilities, such as who may approve access, who may classify data, or who may accept exceptions. Some authorization comes from laws and regulations, which can define mandatory responsibilities, such as safeguarding certain types of information or reporting certain events. Some authorization comes from contracts, where an organization agrees to specific obligations and assigns owners for meeting those obligations. Even the architecture of the organization can be a source, because job roles and organizational boundaries determine what decisions someone can legitimately make. Beginners often treat these sources as separate worlds, but they overlap in real life, and validating authorization means reconciling them rather than picking one at random. When you can name the source, you can also defend the decision later, which matters because security decisions are often questioned after an incident or an audit. Once you understand sources, the next skill is to identify what kind of decision you are dealing with, because different decisions require different authorization levels. Some decisions are strategic, such as defining program priorities, approving policy changes, or accepting significant enterprise risk. Some decisions are tactical, such as defining standards, selecting control approaches, or approving a risk treatment plan for a specific initiative. Some decisions are operational, such as approving routine access requests, responding to alerts, or applying a standard change process. Beginners sometimes treat all security decisions as the same, but the level matters because it determines who must be involved and how formal the decision needs to be. A strategic risk acceptance needs a higher authority and clearer documentation than a routine operational decision. If you validate authorization at the wrong level, you either waste time by escalating everything or create risk by letting small groups make big decisions. The boundary is not about ego. It is about accountability and consequences. Knowing the decision type helps you find the correct authorization path quickly. Authorization boundaries also depend on scope, and scope is one of the most frequently misunderstood concepts for beginners. Scope means the size of the area affected by a decision and the kinds of assets or people that decision touches. A decision might apply only to one application, or it might affect a shared infrastructure used by many teams. It might apply only to public information, or it might touch sensitive personal data. It might involve a single vendor, or it might create a pattern for how vendors are managed across the organization. The larger and more sensitive the scope, the more careful you must be about authorization. A technical team might have authority to adjust settings within their application, but they may not have authority to change enterprise-wide logging standards that affect privacy expectations and storage costs. A business unit might have authority to accept risk for its operations, but not authority to accept risk that impacts other units or enterprise reputation. Validating scope is therefore a key step in validating authorization. When you can state the scope plainly, you can also determine whether the decision should stay local or be escalated. Another key beginner concept is delegation, because many organizations delegate authority to make decisions, but delegation must be clear to be legitimate. Delegation means someone with higher authority grants decision power to someone else within defined limits. For example, an executive might delegate routine access approvals to system owners, while retaining authority for high-impact exceptions. Delegation can also be conditional, meaning the delegate can decide only if certain criteria are met, such as decisions within a budget limit or decisions that follow an approved standard. Beginners sometimes assume delegation exists because someone has been doing the job for a long time, but habit is not the same as authorization. A person can perform tasks informally for years, and then the organization can discover during an audit that the person was never formally authorized. That discovery does not mean the person acted with bad intent, but it does mean the decision record may be challenged. Validating delegation means confirming it is documented, understood, and aligned to governance expectations. When delegation is clear, decisions move faster and remain defensible. It is also important to understand that authorization boundaries include not only what someone can approve, but what someone can require of others. A security team might have authority to publish standards, but not authority to force a business unit to fund an initiative without leadership support. A security leader might be able to recommend a control, but not be able to direct a system owner to implement it outside established processes. This is why security management often involves influence as much as authority. Influence is the ability to persuade and guide, while authorization is the formal permission to decide. Beginners sometimes confuse these and believe that if security is right, security automatically has the right to command. In reality, a mature program respects authorization boundaries and uses governance paths to convert recommendations into approved requirements. This protects the security program from being seen as arbitrary and protects the organization from rogue decision-making. When security respects boundaries, it builds credibility, which makes future approvals easier. Credibility is not a substitute for authority, but it is a powerful support for gaining the right decisions through legitimate channels. To validate authorization in real situations, security leaders rely on evidence rather than assumptions, and evidence usually comes from a small set of reliable artifacts. Governance charters define who makes what kinds of decisions and how those decisions are documented. Policies define ownership of topics like data classification, access control, acceptable use, and exception management. Organizational role definitions and accountability models define who owns systems, processes, and risk decisions. Contracts and service agreements define who is responsible for vendor oversight and which requirements must be enforced. Compliance requirements and legal obligations define mandatory constraints that cannot be negotiated away casually. Beginners sometimes feel overwhelmed by documentation, but the purpose of these artifacts is to remove guesswork and reduce conflict. Validating authorization is not an academic exercise. It is a way to prevent rework, prevent disputes, and make sure decisions hold up under scrutiny. The more sensitive or high-impact the decision, the more you should lean on documented sources rather than informal consensus. A particularly important boundary to validate is risk acceptance authority, because accepting risk is not the same as noticing risk. Many people can identify risk, but only some roles can formally accept it on behalf of the organization. Risk acceptance authority usually belongs to leaders who own the outcome and have the responsibility to weigh trade-offs between risk, cost, speed, and mission impact. Security teams often facilitate risk acceptance by describing the risk clearly, offering mitigation options, and explaining consequences, but they should not quietly accept risk simply to keep projects moving. When risk is accepted by the wrong person, it becomes a hidden liability that can surface later during incidents, audits, or leadership changes. Validating risk acceptance boundaries means confirming who can sign, what information must be included, and what time limits or review cycles are required. It also means ensuring the acceptance is visible to appropriate oversight, because oversight is what turns a risky choice into a managed choice. When risk acceptance is done properly, it becomes a tool for speed with accountability, not a shortcut for avoiding security work. Another boundary that often confuses beginners is the difference between data ownership and system ownership, because authorization can differ depending on which one is involved. A system owner may have authority over how a system operates, including configuration and maintenance decisions. A data owner may have authority over how data is classified, who may access it, and how it may be shared or retained. If you validate authorization only with the system owner, you may miss the fact that the data owner must approve certain uses or disclosures. If you validate authorization only with the data owner, you may miss the operational realities that make certain controls feasible or not. Security decisions often require both perspectives, especially when decisions involve access, sharing, and storage. This is why boundaries matter. The decision might be partly technical and partly governance-driven. A mature security program helps these owners coordinate rather than letting them operate in isolation. Coordination is not bureaucracy. It is how you make sure decisions respect both operational control and information stewardship. Authorization validation also matters during incidents, because incident conditions can change who is allowed to do what. In normal times, a team might need formal approvals to take certain actions, such as shutting down a service or blocking a vendor connection. During an incident, there may be emergency authorities that allow rapid containment actions, but those authorities should be defined in advance, not invented in the moment. Beginners sometimes assume emergencies allow anything, but uncontrolled emergency action can cause unnecessary outages, destroy evidence, or violate obligations. Validating incident authorization boundaries means knowing who can declare an incident, who can authorize containment actions, who must be informed, and how decisions are documented after the fact. It also means understanding when emergency authority ends and normal governance resumes, because prolonged emergency behavior can lead to permanent bad practices. A good security program treats incident authority as a defined exception with clear rules. That clarity protects the organization and the responders. You also need to understand how external obligations can create authorization boundaries that internal preferences cannot override. Laws and regulations may require specific protections, reporting, or controls, and those requirements can limit what leaders can decide. Contracts can require certain security practices, and violating them can create legal or financial consequences. A beginner might think leadership can simply choose to accept a risk and move on, but sometimes leadership cannot accept the risk without also accepting a violation. Validating boundaries means recognizing when a decision is constrained by an obligation, and then ensuring the right stakeholders, such as legal or compliance partners, are involved. This does not mean those partners make every decision, but it does mean their input helps define what options are permissible. Security management often involves translating obligations into practical requirements that teams can follow. When you validate these boundaries early, you avoid late-stage surprises that cause delays and conflict. Early validation is a speed strategy, not a slowdown strategy. Finally, once you validate sources and boundaries of authorization, you need to communicate decisions in a way that preserves legitimacy. That means capturing what was decided, who decided it, what scope it covers, and what assumptions it depends on. It also means clarifying what is not included in the decision, so teams do not apply it incorrectly elsewhere. Beginners sometimes think documentation is only for auditors, but documentation is also for memory and coordination. When people leave roles, when projects change, and when incidents happen, the organization needs a record of why choices were made. This record reduces repeated debates and prevents accidental drift into unauthorized changes. It also helps security programs demonstrate consistency, which builds trust. Consistency makes security feel fair, and fairness makes security easier to adopt. Authorization validation, combined with clear communication, turns security from informal advice into a stable decision system. In conclusion, validating sources and boundaries of authorization for security decisions is about ensuring that security actions and risk choices are legitimate, accountable, and defensible within the organization's governance system. Authorization comes from multiple sources, including governance structures, policies, laws, regulations, contracts, and delegated roles, and understanding those sources prevents decisions from being made on confidence alone. Boundaries depend on decision type and scope, and they must be respected so that strategic choices are made by the right authorities and operational actions remain consistent with approved standards. Clear delegation, structured risk acceptance, and careful coordination between system and data ownership reduce confusion and prevent hidden liabilities. Incident conditions and external obligations introduce additional boundaries that must be understood in advance so emergency action remains controlled and compliant. When security leaders validate authorization and document decisions clearly, they reduce conflict, prevent rework, and build trust, creating a program where security decisions hold up under pressure and remain aligned to organizational purpose.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.